Hello and welcome back, dear students. Wish you all stay happy, healthy, and safe at home and do your studies regularly and properly. I'm Yojna Parak, and today we are going to see a new chapter for Standard 10 from your English textbook Footprints Without Feet, that is your supplementary reader. From that book, we are going to see fifth chapter. The name of this chapter is Footprints Without Feet. The name of this chapter and the book's name is the same. This chapter is written by H. G. Wells. By the title of this chapter, you can understand that footprints without feet, that means the impression of feet is there, but there are no feet. So here the chapter is about an invisible man. Here in this image also you can see the clothes and shoes, cap are visible, but there is no body part of that man. So in this chapter we are going to see the story of an invisible man, and we will get to know that how this happened, and because of that what trouble people had to face, and whether this nonsense was put an end or not, and how. Let us begin now. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. Muddy, that means covered in or full of mud. Imprints, that is imprints or stamp or mark or outline on a surface. Bare, that means not clothed or uncovered. Gazed, that means looked at steadily and intently, especially in admiration, surprise, or thought. Remarkable, that means worthy of attention or striking. Sight, that means the faculty or power of seeing. Those two boys were surprised when they saw that in the middle of London there was a house. On the steps of that house there were muddy imprints of what? Of pair of bare feet. So they started thinking that what a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house? Why he has not worn any shoe, and how this muddy imprints, how this mark or stamp of feet came here, and where is the man? They could see the imprints, but they could not see the man. As they gazed, they looked very intently. They wanted to know about that, so they steadily looked at it, and they saw a remarkable sight. The thing which was striking and which was surprising, which they saw. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. They couldn't understand that how this fresh footmark appeared here. Further footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, and at last disappeared altogether. Progressing, that means move forward or onward in space or time. Next is fascinated, that means strongly attracted and interested. Fainter, that is barely perceptible, which you are not able to look properly or clearly. So when those two boys started following those footmarks, they saw a fresh footmark, and they couldn't understand that how these footmarks are coming here, because they couldn't see any man there, but there were only footprints, and those footprints were increasing, and they started following them, descending the steps and progressing down the street. Those footprints started uh, creating one by one downwards the step and towards the street. The boys followed all those footprints step by step, and they were astonished, they were fascinated, they were completely attracted or interested in those footprints, and they keep on following it until the muddy impression became fainter. That means slowly it became less visible and at last disappeared altogether. So here they could see only the footprints which were going downwards, downwards the step and toward the street, but they couldn't see any man who was creating those footprints. So they were surprised that how these footprints are created, and as they were following it, slowly those footprints started getting fainter and less appeared, and then finally it got disappeared. When that mud was not in those feet, after that they couldn't see the footprints, the footmarks. So they could see the footmarks only till the mud was there in the foot, but when the mud was gone, they couldn't see the footmarks. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Transparent, that means you can look through it. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out an experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Bewildered, that means perplexed and confused and very puzzled, because they could see footmarks but they couldn't see the man who was creating those footmarks. So they were completely confused and puzzled, surprised by that. And when the mud was not in his feet, the footmarks also were not visible, and finally it got disappeared. They were completely puzzled that how these footmarks came, and how this happened, that was just a mystery for them. But this mystery was a scientist. The scientist, whose name is Griffin, who did many experiments to prove that human body can be invisible. So it was the result of his experiment that his body got disappeared, and those footmarks were created by Griffin when he was walking, but his body was disappeared, invisible, because of his experiment. So those boys could not understand that how these footprints came, but it was due to the experiment of Griffin, which he applied on himself, and he got disappeared. But as he was walking by the mud, those mud footprints created when he was walking, and when that mud was removed from his feet, those footmarks also got invisible. So, in this way, he became completely an invisible person by his experiment. And those boys who saw those footmarks without any body there, without any person walking there, so they got puzzled. They couldn't understand that how this impression are created without a man. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass. Through it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. He was a brilliant scientist, but still he was a lawless person. He never followed the law and rules regulation. And now he had made that chemical which will make the human body invisible and transparent. So he swallowed, he ate some certain type of rare drugs due to which the body of human became transparent and invisible, just like the sheet of glass, and also solid like the sheet of glass, because the body was there but it was not visible. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. He wanted him to leave that place. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So, after doing that experiment, after swallowing those rare drugs, he became transparent and invisible. And as his landlord disliked him because he was a lawless person, so he wanted to let him out of the house. In the revenge of that, Griffin set fire to his house. Now, he didn't want to get caught by the police, so he became invisible and transparent, and he removed his clothes so no one will get to know about him. And now he was homeless wanderer. He was wandering on the street as he was not visible, so no one could get that where he was. He was wanderer, homeless, without clothes and without money, because he had burned the house. Now he had no home, and as he was invisible, so he also removed his clothes so that no one will be able to see him, and he had no money. Now he was invisible until he stepped in the mud. So, until he stepped in the mud, no one could see him. But when he stepped in the mud, those footprints created by him when he walked, and by that, those people get to know that someone was there, but he was invisible. And only because of the mud, footprints were created as he walked. We can say that Griffin was a lawless person because he set fire uh, in his landlord's house. So in this way, he was an intelligent scientist but a lawless person. He never followed the law. So this was the drawback of Griffin. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. But his adventures were by no means over. he had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter, the air was bitterly cold, and he could not do without clothes. Wander, that means walk or move in a leisurely or aimless way. Bitterly, that means in an angry, hurt, or resentful way. So, he could escape from those boys who were following his footprints in London as the mud got removed from his feet. So, footmarks were not visible and he could escape from those boys. But here, his adventures didn't end. He kept on doing such kind of mischief uh, even now. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. Now he was wandering in the street of London without clothes, but the time he had chosen for this experiment was not right for him. So it was a bad time when he chose to do that experiment on himself and started wandering in the street of London as he had burnt the house of his landlord. Why that time was not good for him? Because it was the midwinter and the air was bitterly cold. It was too cold and he could not survive without clothes. Instead of walking about the street, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. Now, as he was invisible and as the shop was about to get closed, so he entered in that shop and no one could see him as there was no one. So he started eating and he wore some clothes and he got warmth and food also without any expense as no one could see him. So he had to pay nothing and he was getting the food also and clothes. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon the shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat. He became a fully dressed and visible person. Only his body parts were not visible, but the clothes he had worn on his body were visible. So, by those clothes, one could get that he was a person, not visible by skin, but visible by clothes. In the kitchen of the restaurant house, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. So, in this way, he again started doing those mischievous things. He was intelligent but a wicked person. So, after setting the house of his landlord on fire, he left from there and then he created mud prints and astonished those boys. And after that, he entered in the store without anyone's knowledge and started using the things of that store without paying anything. So now he opened boxes and wrappers and started wearing the clothes to keep himself warm. He wore shoes, overcoat, and wide brimmed hat, a big hat. And then he was fully dressed and visible person as the clothes on his body were visible. And then he went in the kitchen of that restaurant house and he found something to eat. He found cold meat and coffee, and then he ended up his meal with sweets and wine, which he took from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. Panicked, that means feel or cause to feel panic. So he got tensed and worried. He could find food and clothes and shelter in that store to keep himself warm and to feed himself. And then he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilt. So he slept on the blankets. But everything would have gone well with Griffin if he would have managed to wake up in the morning early than the arrival of the assistants of that store. But he could not get up early, and that is why when in the morning the assistants of that store came, they saw him. He was lying on the pile of quilt, and as they saw a thief in that store without their knowledge, they, as he became panicked and started to run, they all the assistants also started chasing him, and at the end he could only save him by removing all the clothes he had worn. So then only he became invisible, and those assistants could not catch him as they could not see him. But now again he was naked in that chill January air. He was again feeling that cold. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulder, the neck, and his face. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane. This is the place in London, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages around his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. Theatrical, that is related to acting, actors, or to the theatre. Shivering, that means shaking slightly and uncontrollably as a result of being cold, frightened, or excited. Whiskers, that means a long projecting hair or bristle growing from the face or snout of many mammals. So finally, he decided that he will go to a theatrical company, and he was hoping that at least there he can find something to cover himself and also to cover the empty space above his shoulder, that means neck and face. So he wanted to cover his neck and face and his hands and feet and rest of the body by clothes. So in this way he will cover his body completely, and he will wear a different mask, so no one will be able to identify that he was Griffin. Now he was shivering with cold. He hurried to Drury Lane, that was the center of theatre world. So there he could find everything which he wanted. In theater, people used to keep clothes and some things which are used for changing their appearance, because they have to act of different people. So those things were useful for Griffin. So finally he decided to go to the theater company, and he went to the Duryland, and uh, there he could find everything which he wanted. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way. What he wanted, he started doing that. Invisible, upstairs, and came down a little later. So he went upstairs, and after a while he came down. When he came, he was wearing bandage around his forehead. So his forehead was not visible, only the bandage was visible. Then on eyes he wore dark glasses, and he put a false nose, and then he put big bushy side whiskers and a large hat to cover his head. Whiskers, that means mustache, he wore. In this way, somehow he managed to cover his face, his neck, and his whole body. So now he was visible, but no one was able to identify him as Griffin. To escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to the village of Iping, where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Callously, that is, in a way that shows an insensitive and cruel disregard for others. Inn, that is a pub, or typically one in the country, in some cases providing accommodation. Wagging, that is move or cause to move rapidly to and fro. So now, after getting the clothes and the attire by which he could cover himself and no one will be able to identify him as Griffin, after getting that attire, he wanted to escape from that place. So, to escape without being seen, he, with cruel and insensitive manner, attacked the shopkeeper from behind so that he was not able to see Griffin. And after that, he robbed him and he took all the money he could find. And he was very eager, in a hurry. He wanted to get out of the London from the crowded street, so that because he was worried that he would not get identified, or if anyone will see his this kind of look, they will start surprising and they will start following him and will talk about him. So he just wanted to get out of that place. And then he took a train and he went to the village of Iping, where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn, in a place where the people provided accommodation for strangers. So he went to the local inn. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in the winter was in any case an unusual event. So the owner of that inn were surprised when they saw a stranger, and even it was unusual that he came in winter to that inn, and also his appearance was also uncommon. So he looked weird and it was also weird that he came in winter to that inn. So they started uh, talking about him, and they were inquisitive about Griffin. Appearance set all tongues wagging. Tongues wagging, that means they all started uh, querying about Griffin's appearance and his arrival to the inn. So, in this way, again, he made everyone curious about himself. With this, we come to an end of first part of this chapter, in which we saw that how he troubled many people by his wicked act. He never worried about those people because he was a lawless person. Even though he was an intelligent scientist, but he was not kind-hearted and he was not obeying the law. And he always troubled people. So these were the mischievous act of Griffin we saw in the first part of this chapter. Now we will see that what happens to Griffin and other people because of Griffin in the next part. Till then, take care of yourself and be safe at home. Thanks for being with me. See you.